From the heart of Africa, Burkina Faso shines anew.
The Africa Spoke. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful African stories.
What if I told you the United States just triggered the beginning of the end? Not in the Middle East, not in Asia, but right in the heart of Africa? Because that's exactly what it did. One missile. One decision. One miscalculation. That's all it took to shake the very foundations of American influence on an entire continent. Last week, a U.S. drone strike leveled a communications outpost in northern Burkina Faso, officially described as a counterterrorism measure. But here's the part no one in Washington wants to admit. The target wasn't just a building, it was a symbol, a message, a line crossed. And instead of suppressing threats, the strike ignited something far more dangerous: unity. You might think it was just another operation in the endless war on terror. But what followed? That was a political earthquake. Within hours of the U.S. strike, something began stirring across Africa that Washington hadn't anticipated. Not retaliation from militants, but an uprising of minds. From the streets of Bamako to the airwaves of Lagos, the reaction was swift and visceral. State-run channels in Mali labeled the attack a foreign incursion on sovereign soil. In Nairobi, youth groups staged vigils in front of the Burkinabe embassy. Hashtags like #HandsOffAfrica and Our Land Our Call trended in over a dozen African countries. The African Union, often criticized for bureaucratic inertia, called an emergency virtual summit within 24 hours. Delegates from 41 member states showed up, a level of urgency not seen since the Libyan intervention in 2011. In a rare moment of near unanimity, they denounced the strike as a breach of trust between Africa and its longtime security partner. Even typically Western-aligned governments like Ghana and Kenya demanded explanations. Ghana's foreign minister called the strike deeply troubling, warning that military partnerships must not turn into unilateral decisions imposed on the continent. To some, this felt like history repeating itself. To others, it felt like history refusing to repeat. If you think this is just a blip, another headline that fades by next week, think again. When was the last time nearly half of a continent responded to a single drone strike with synchronized political will? Now flip the perspective. Imagine being in Washington right now, sitting at a Defense Department desk, watching allies question your every move. What do? Dig in deeper or back off? And if you were in that seat, what would you choose? If you've got a take on this, don't hold it in. Comment below, like this video, and share it with someone who still thinks Africa is geopolitically silent. You see, for years the West sold Africa a deal: security in exchange for loyalty, military bases, joint operations, drone surveillance, all under the banner of partnership. But after that strike, a lot of people started asking, partnership for who? In Burkina Faso, the government wasted no time. President Traoré, who by the way is only in his mid-30s, went on national TV and called the attack a violation of their existence, not just their borders. That speech? It was replayed on state television across West Africa like it was the gospel of a new era. A day later, something unexpected happened. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger signed a mutual defense pact. Yeah, 3 countries with military-led governments, all of which had either distanced themselves or cut ties with France and the US, basically said, touch one of us and you'll answer to all of us. They're calling it the Sahel Shield Alliance. Now think about that. A continent long criticized for fragmentation just created a mini NATO, without a single Western hand guiding it. That's not a footnote, that's a headline. Here's where it gets uncomfortable for policymakers in D.C. The model the U.S. built in Africa, military outposts, intelligence sharing, funding elite units, it's all built on trust. Quiet, strategic trust. And this one strike may have shattered it in a way that's hard to rebuild. I mean, ask yourself, if you're a leader in the region, would you really pick the side that drops bombs first and explains later? I'm curious. Do you think alliances like this could actually hold? Or will they crumble under pressure like so many others before them? Let me know in the comments. And yeah, share this if you think more people need to hear what's really happening on the continent. Let's not sugarcoat it. The aftermath of the Burkina Faso strike sent shockwaves far beyond Ouagadougou. What we're seeing now isn't just public outrage, it's realignment. In the days following the attack, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov wasted no time. He publicly condemned the U.S. operation, calling it yet another violation of international norms, and offered military technical assistance to support African sovereignty. A day later, the Kremlin sent a delegation to Bamako for closed-door talks. Coincidence? You decide. China, too, didn't stay silent. While their statements were more measured, state-owned media like Global Times ran editorials blasting the return of gunboat diplomacy. Meanwhile, Chinese investments in African security infrastructure quietly ramped up, not in headlines but in contracts. Surveillance systems, communication networks, border control upgrades, all being offered with zero political lectures attached. And then there's Turkey. President Erdogan has been openly courting African nations for years, and now Ankara stepped in with offers of drone technology and defense cooperation, particularly to nations distancing themselves from NATO influence. Now compare that to the U.S. response. The Pentagon called the strike a calculated response to credible threats, but they refused to release details. No satellite images, no names, no timelines, just a vague press release and a bunch of silence after that. It felt hollow. Even France, which once saw West Africa as its backyard, is struggling to hold on. Following the withdrawal from Mali and Burkina Faso, French military influence in the Sahel has shrunk dramatically. Just this year, French troops pulled out of Niger after local protests demanded their exit. And let's not forget, in Guinea, a top official recently said, "Africa no longer needs overseers. We need equals." So now, African nations are looking east. Not necessarily because they fully trust Russia or China, but because, frankly, they've run out of reasons to trust the West. And look, we can debate whether that's a good or bad thing, but what's undeniable is that the shift is happening. Do you think this tilt toward non-Western powers is just a reaction to U.S. overreach? Or is it a calculated pivot that's been brewing for years, waiting for the right spark? Drop your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit like so more people can join the conversation. Back in Washington, things weren't exactly calm either. Behind closed doors, the fallout from the Burkina Faso strike sparked more chaos than anyone at the Pentagon was prepared for. Just 72 hours after the attack, the Senate Armed Services Committee demanded a classified briefing. Senator Mark Rutledge from Illinois, a moderate not known for being a firebrand, asked flat out, "Why wasn't Congress informed about a strike in a sovereign African nation? Are we starting wars by press release now?" At the same time, the House Foreign Affairs Committee received a flood of letters from advocacy groups, African diaspora communities, and civil society organizations demanding accountability. Not one, not 10, over 1,800 formal statements within a week. That's unprecedented. Meanwhile, the media coverage was, to put it mildly, all over the place. CNN stuck to the official line, calling the strike a counter-terror operation based on regional intelligence. Fox News, predictably, praised it as a show of strength. But over on the left, The Intercept ran a damning headline: "Did the U.S. just bomb a country into rebellion?" NPR brought in regional analysts who pointed out a disturbing trend. Every time the U.S. conducts a strike without host nation approval, insurgent recruitment spikes within 2 weeks. It happened in Yemen. It happened in Somalia. And now, it looks like it's happening in West Africa too. Even within the intelligence community, there were leaks. Yeah, already. An anonymous official told Politico that there was pushback internally, and that alternative options were ignored in favor of a show of force. Translation? Not everyone agreed with the decision, but someone pushed it through anyway. President Biden, during a press gaggle, gave a lukewarm defense. He said the U.S. remains committed to working with African partners, but avoided specifics on the strike. Reporters asked for more, but the White House press team quickly moved on. And that's the thing. Silence speaks too. And right now, that silence is costing the US more than it's saving. If you're Americans, ask yourself, is this really how we should be handling our global relationships? Shouldn't strikes like these at least require some level of public debate? Or is classified now just code for don't ask? And if you're not American, how does this make you feel about trusting US military cooperation in your region? Wherever you stand, leave a comment. Let's talk about what accountability should actually look like in moments like this. Let's be honest. Most Americans don't think about Africa until something goes wrong. But for policymakers, losing influence on that continent, that's not just bad optics. That's a strategic nightmare. Let's start with the basics. Resources. Africa holds over 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including rare earths like cobalt, lithium, and tantalum, the lifeblood of everything from smartphones to electric vehicles. Just one example, the Democratic Republic of Congo supplies around 70% of the world's cobalt. China already dominates that supply chain. If US access shrinks further, it's not just about politics. It's about production, prices, and national security. Then there's uranium. Niger, before the recent military shakeup, was one of the biggest suppliers of uranium to Europe. With growing nuclear ambitions in the West, losing favor in that region means ceding control over a critical energy asset, one that powers both homes and warheads. And it doesn't stop at minerals. Africa is projected to house 25% of the world's population by 2050. That's an entire generation of consumers, labor, innovation, and influence. In the global chessboard, population means leverage, markets, voting blocks at the UN strategic depth. Let's not forget the geography. The Horn of Africa sits at the intersection of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, a vital choke point for global trade. Roughly 10% of the world's oil passes through those waters. That's why both the US and China have bases in Djibouti. It's not about friendship, it's about positioning. So now, imagine if the US loses not just one, but a cluster of strategic allies in West Africa. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, all leaning toward alternative partners. Imagine if that sentiment spreads to Ghana, Senegal, even Nigeria. That's not just an African problem, that's a shift in the gravitational center of global influence. We've seen this before in the Middle East. The US pulled out of Afghanistan, and who stepped in? China, with mining contracts. Russia, with security talks. Turkey, with soft power diplomacy. The same playbook is now being used in Africa, just with faster internet and sharper suits. So when analysts say Africa is slipping away, they're not being dramatic. They're being honest. And let's get real. Can the US afford to fight proxy battles in Eastern Europe, hedge against China in the Pacific, manage Middle East flashpoints, and lose its foothold in Africa all at once? Or is this the moment when global ambition finally hits its limits? You tell me, because this isn't just a military question anymore. It's economic, it's technological, it's existential. Leave your take in the comments. Do you think the US still has time to course correct in Africa? Or has the window quietly closed while no one was paying attention? The thing is, when a continent as big, as rich, and as politically complex as Africa starts to shift, the ripple effects don't stay in Africa. Let's talk South America. Just last month, Brazil's foreign minister commented on the Burkina Faso strike, saying it raises serious questions about sovereignty and the balance of global power. That's Brazil, a BRICS nation, and a growing critic of Western military intervention. Days later, Brazil hosted a summit on non-Western strategic alliances that included delegates from Mali, Guinea, and even Iran. If that sounds like an odd mix, it is. But it's also a warning shot. In Southeast Asia, the Philippines, traditionally close to the US, has started hedging. After witnessing how Africa reacted to being sidelined in military decisions, local analysts began asking tough questions. Are we next? The Jakarta Post ran an op-ed titled, "When Sovereignty Becomes Optional," directly referencing the Burkina Faso case. Quietly, Indonesia and Malaysia are expanding talks with Turkey and China on alternative defense cooperation, bypassing traditional Western pipelines. And then there's Europe. France, still reeling from the breakdown of its Sahel influence, is caught in a credibility crisis. German and Italian defense officials have started warning that if African nations turn their backs on the West, migration routes, energy deals, and trade flows will all be disrupted. And that affects every European household. In Brussels, a leaked EU report admitted that Washington's actions have accelerated anti-Western sentiment among younger African demographics. That's diplomatic language for, we're losing the next generation. And you know who's paying attention? China. Their Belt and Road Initiative has already poured over $150 billion into African infrastructure. Now they're ramping up cultural exchange programs, offering scholarships, media training, and tech investment with zero strings attached. No lectures, no military bases, just quiet, calculated influence. Russia, same play. From Wagner Group deals to mining contracts, they're positioning themselves as the alternative partner for countries who've grown tired of Western double standards. And let's not forget the United Nations, where voting blocs matter. A more unified Africa, especially one skeptical of U.S. motives, could shift resolutions, peacekeeping mandates, and sanctions. It already happened last year when 28 African countries abstained from condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That wasn't just indecision, that was a statement. So here's the big question. Is Africa the first domino or the center of the board? Because the way things are moving, it's no longer about who controls Africa. It's about who Africa chooses to work with. And the answer might not be what Washington expected. Let's be honest. Do you think the West underestimated how fast this could happen? Or were they too confident that no one else could compete? Let me know what you think. And yeah, if this part made you stop and think, hit that like button so we keep these conversations going. Let's talk about the faces behind the shift. Because while everyone's focused on military strategy and global positioning, there's something even more powerful at play: leadership. And not the kind we're used to seeing. Take Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old president of Burkina Faso. He didn't rise through elections. He came through a coup, yes. But what's shocking isn't how he took power. It's what he's done with it. Since the U.S. strike, Traoré's approval ratings have soared past 80%, according to polling from the Ouagadougou Institute of Public Opinion. Why? Because he's saying what millions across the continent feel, but rarely hear from their leaders. We don't need permission to exist. We defend our future, on our terms. It's bold, it's defiant, and it's working. He's not alone. In Mali, Assimi Goïta, another military leader, has pushed out French troops, ended cooperation with Western NGOs, and aligned his country with Russia for arms and training. In Guinea, Mamadi Doumbouya wears full military fatigues to international summits and speaks of breaking the colonial cycle. And in Niger, following the most recent drone incident, interim leaders have doubled down on the message, Africa answers to no one. Now, Western media often frames these men as authoritarian, populist, or militant. Maybe, but here's the thing. On the ground, they're not being seen as tyrants. They're being seen as protectors. Guardians of sovereignty, and for a generation that grew up watching leaders bow to IMF conditions and foreign embassies, this feels like a long overdue pivot. Let's not pretend this doesn't make Washington nervous. For decades, the U.S. preferred working with polished diplomats, Western-educated elites, fluent in English and French, trained in Davos think. But these new leaders? They're not here for photo ops or PowerPoints. They're here to rewrite the rules. And honestly, maybe that's what scares the establishment most. Not the uniforms, not the speeches, but the fact that millions of Africans are actually buying into this, yes. So here's the dilemma. Is this a resurgence of dangerous strongmen? Or is it the birth of a post-colonial leadership model that the West simply doesn't know how to handle? That's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to ask out loud, but we're asking it here. Where do you stand on this? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's hear all sides. And don't forget to share this if you think more people need to see who's really calling the shots in Africa now. For decades, the phrase world order meant something very specific. And let's be real, it was built around US and European dominance. Washington set the tone, Brussels followed, and the rest of the world, especially the global South, played catch-up. But after Burkina Faso, that balance looks different. Not because one drone strike flipped the world upside down, but because it exposed just how fragile that order actually is. Think about it. Within weeks of the strike, we saw three major shifts. One, African leaders pushing back, not diplomatically but decisively. Two, global powers like China and Russia jumping in, not to rescue anyone but to offer a very different kind of partnership. And three, public opinion, especially among African youth, swinging harder and faster than any analyst predicted. And here's what's wild. None of this came from a war, an election, or a treaty. It came from a single miscalculation, a single moment when the US assumed the old rules still applied. They don't. Across the continent, young Africans aren't talking about aid. They're talking about autonomy. They're not protesting for visas. They're rallying for sovereignty. And more importantly, they're paying attention, watching who respects them and who dismisses them, who builds with them and who bombs without warning. That awareness, that's power. And let's be clear, this isn't just about Africa. What we're seeing could be the early cracks of a much bigger shift. A post-Western world where influence doesn't come from military bases or televised speeches, but from who actually listens. Are we at the dawn of a new global balance? Or are we simply witnessing the slow collapse of an old empire, clinging to relevance with drones and press briefings? You don't have to pick a side right now, but if you're watching this, you're already part of the conversation, and that matters more than you think. Drop a comment with where you think this is heading. And yeah, if this made you think twice about the headlines, share it. Let's make this discussion bigger than the narrative. Here's what's not being said on cable news or White House podiums. Africa isn't asking anymore. It's declaring that sovereignty isn't a line in a speech, it's a line in the sand. Declaring that silence doesn't mean submission, and partnerships built on fear are no partnerships at all. And let's be absolutely clear. This isn't about anti-American sentiment. It's about pro-African ownership, of land, of decisions, of future. The people marching in Bamako, holding signs in Nairobi, posting videos in Accra. They're not anti-West. They're anti-interference. They're tired of being told what stability should look like, tired of seeing their skies violated by drones flown from 6,000 miles away, tired of watching press conferences that explain everything except what really matters. Why weren't they asked? This moment isn't neat. It's not comfortable. But maybe that's exactly why it matters. So if you're still watching and you're from the West, especially from the US, let me say this directly. You don't get to act surprised. You don't get to feign confusion when decades of one-sided policy finally get a response. You don't get to call it instability when the same nations you ignored start choosing themselves. And you sure as hell don't get to ask why now, when the better question is, why did it take this long? If you're African and this hits home, share this loudly. Because for the first time in a long time, the world isn't speaking for you. You're speaking back. If you're American, ask yourself, is this the kind of influence you want your country to have? Do you want respect or just control? And if you're still undecided, good. That means you're thinking. Stay there. But don't stay silent. Comment, share, subscribe. Not for me, but because the algorithm listens, even when governments don't.